A lot of the major players are using the word co-living to describe just shared living as a way to pack in more people into a smaller amount of space, which is a shame because there's more to co-living than just sharing space. It's about all the perks that come along with shared living. I always say that co-living, it's not about having a smaller life or thinking you're like, oh, I have to have roommates now because I need to save money. It's about what the collective community experience can give you.
I'm Ran Dror, and this is Remake, a podcast about design, systems, and society. In each episode, I talk to someone who's trying to change our lives for the better in some meaningful way, whether through a new product, new venture, or a new way of looking at the world. And I try to understand how they came to it, what makes them tick, and what we can learn from them. Today we're talking about co-living. I've long believed that paying attention to the fact that humans evolved to live in tribes as opposed to isolated nuclear families was a key to unlocking a tremendous amount of latent needs, well-being, and happiness. Today, a convergence of different trends is making co-living a real movement in the West. Whereas in much of the world, living in community is a thing as old as time. The rise in real estate costs, financial recession, urban loneliness, the digital nomad lifestyle, and the advent of online communities and co-working spaces led many to a natural conclusion that living more densely, when it involves a real community of like-minded individuals, could be not only more affordable, but actually more fulfilling. Commercial co-living companies such as Selena, Outpost, and Adam Neumann's new Flow, as well as thousands of co-living communities around the world, are offering a less lonely, more connected, and fuller hospitality, travel, or long-term living experience. They help making sense of a new city, finding new friends, and experiencing belonging a much more straightforward process. And in the process, help us challenge the way things have always been done. That's why I was excited to talk to Leah Ziliak. Leah founded the Coliving Consultant in 2019. And has become one of the most sought-after co-living professionals in the field. She's an international speaker, writer, and entrepreneur, and works with co-living brands around the world to create positive customer experiences within shared living. As a digital nomad, Leah travels the world full-time and works with clients both on-site and remotely. We spoke in January 2023, and it was really great to learn from Leah, who's clearly thought about these topics deeply and has deep experience both living in and designing these sorts of communities. We talked about her digital nomad lifestyle, how having a pen pal from another country instilled the desire in her to explore other cultures, what it was like to live and work on a cruise ship, why she left her music career to become a digital nomad and co-living consultant. What is co-living? And what are the range of options for the co-living curious? Why is co-living becoming such a trend around the world? The freeing experience of co-living for a solo digital nomad. The value of community and the importance of friendships. Different types of co-living spaces. Co-living versus packing more people in a small space. Crafting a community experience and also a hospitality experience. Getting people involved in the creation versus supplying everything. Co-living and old age. Why is co-living slower to take off in the United States? The urge to explore the world versus the urge to lay roots and nest. And her new group teaching more women how to travel solo. Design is all about challenging defaults, and so what stayed with me the most is how important it is to challenge societal defaults in terms of our living situation, geography, and lifestyle. Who said the right way to live is to work hard all day so that you can afford a large house with a fence and smart locks to keep everyone else out? And who said that we have to wait until retirement to spend significant time traveling the world? We have some amazing episodes lined up for you with thinkers, designers, makers, authors, and activists answering questions like, what do most people still need to understand about transgender and non-binary individuals? Why is prototyping essential to making truly new things? What's the value of knowing what you're about and crafting a personal manifesto? And how can we find the freedom to think in an increasingly connected world? So follow this podcast on your favorite podcast app or head over to remakepod.org to subscribe. And if you're a subscriber already and enjoy our show, you can go to remakepod.org/support and join our supporter community. And now, without further ado, let's jump right in with Leah Ziliak. All right. I'm sitting here across the screen from Leah Ziliak. Leah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I like to always start a conversation connecting us with the present moment. And so I'd love to hear what it's like to be you in the world today. What does your life look like? What's on your mind?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, it's different every single day. I'm a digital nomad, so I travel full time. Right now, I'm in Buenos Aires. So I am in an apartment here. I've been here since October. Took a short trip to Patagonia, but just got back here. So I'll be here for another couple months. So in the present moment, I am working and figuring out how to live in new places all the time. But yeah, just enjoying the city and exploring new places. And it's just something I always love. So it's good to be in the present moment as a nomad because you're seeing so many new things all the time. It's much easier to be present when you're out of that routine. So yeah, every day is a little bit different.
Yeah, that's amazing. My dad is Argentinian and I've never been. So on my list to
you
go.
need to. It's so beautiful. It's such a great city. It's such a cool vibe and food's amazing and people are great. So
one thing that seems really hard about the nomadic lifestyle, and I understand you're flying around from community to community and this is also your job now. But one of the things that seems hard to me is actually getting work done when you're in a new place and all you want to do is explore. So how do you manage that?
It is difficult, especially when you get to a new place and all you want to do is see everything that there is to see. But after you've been doing it for a while, I've been a nomad for 4.5 years now. So you kind of get in a routine and you know what works and what doesn't. For me, I like to get to a new city and I kind of explore it as much as I can for a few days. And then I take a break and get back into work mode. And right now I know what works as far as where to work and what times kind of work that way. So I kind of get in a routine, but it's a different routine. It's just the same routine in different countries.
Yeah, amazing. So as a way to explore the topic for today's conversation, we like to start always with the person. And so I have a question for you, which we found helpful. What's something you learned early in life or in childhood that still drives or guides you today, that's still part of your life today?
I would say the impact that travel has had on my life is kind of a different path because I didn't grow up traveling. That wasn't really something my family did. We took small trips in the US, but had never been abroad until I was in my 30s. But I had a pen pal when I was in the 3rd, 4th grade, and she was from India. And that just always stuck with me. As a kid, I had such a strong desire to connect with different cultures around the world and to have friends all over the world. And I think most of the people in my class, they wrote to their pen pals once, twice. This was before email and Wi-Fi and all these sorts of things. And for me, I stayed in contact with her for years and years. It was just so interesting to me or so unique that I had a friend who was across the world telling me about her life. And I think that always stuck with me for sure, as far as having those connections around the world and how unique that is and how much you can learn and how much it expands your views. So I think that's always stuck with me, that idea of travel and seeing, all these different communities.
The pen pal program, I don't think ever made it to Israel. It was, I always see it in like American shows, but we've never had that, but it's such a good idea. And so this desire to travel is an interesting kind of lead in, but you started in music, didn't you?
I did. Yeah. I went to school for music business in Nashville and I worked in the music industry for many years. And I kind of just got tired of the industry. I thought it was going to be this really creative, fun industry to be in. And then in the end, it just ended up being a desk job and me making phone calls and writing emails all day long. And it didn't really sit with what I wanted to do in life. Yeah, I transitioned from that. I started working on cruise ships for a while. I thought that was going to be my kind of transition into travel life. So I did that for a few years. And I think once you've experienced life out of the 9 to 5, there's really no turning back. So after cruise ships, there was really no option for me to go back to a desk job. And I'm like, okay, I need to figure out what I'm going to do next, because I knew that I wanted to see more of the world. And so, yeah, that kind of transitioned into full-time travel.
That must have been like an exciting moment, getting on your first cruise ship and getting the job. I fantasized about doing something like that. Tell me, what was that like?
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, I worked in the entertainment department, so I was hosting the shows and trivias and games and kind of having that one-on-one contact with the guests. I had worked a lot in hospitality as well in the past, so it fit with that part of things. But it's a different kind of life. I mean, you're living on board for 6 months at a time with no days off. I mean, you have very long hours, and then you get 3 months off. So it just transitions back and forth. So it's a very different life, and it's a unique community that exists on board ships too, because you're with these crew members, 1,500 crew members usually on each ship, and they're from all over the world, which was probably my favorite part of working on ships, is having, again, friends all over the world, this international community. But when you're living and working alongside this group of diverse people, it makes for a really great experience. So beyond the job itself, which was very difficult and long hours, like the community piece that happened was what really kept me there for a while, and in what draws people into the ship life.
A cruise ship is kind of a co-living situation. And actually, I got my skipper's license a couple years ago, partly because I was looking at these ships. We have a marina here, and it just felt like there's a real sense of together. If you're with other people on boat, nobody's going anywhere. It's like an inherent tribe that you have. So how did this lead to kind of a journey into co-living for you and what you're doing today?
Yeah, so after ships, I went and I did some solo traveling in Europe, and I loved traveling solo. That was such a great experience, but I missed having those sort of deeper connections that you get when you're living and traveling with people. It's a different experience. Kind of was meeting other travelers, but I knew that kind of wasn't the group of people that I could long-term have, friendships with, because they were going back home at the end of it, and I knew that I was going to keep going. And so I had heard of the concept of co-living, and so I tried a space in Lisbon. I just wanted to see what it was like. At that time, I wasn't working yet. I wasn't a true nomad. I was just wanting to feel out what a life of travel would look like. And I just loved every bit of it. Once I got to the co-living space, I realized that this was the group of people that I could hang out with all the time. They were people who were professionals. They were in their 30s and 40s, and they were working during the day and the co-working. And then at night, we always had things going on. There was WhatsApp chat. So we always had opportunities to, hey, who wants to get coffee? Who wants to go here for the weekend? And it was such a great freeing experience for me, because it was the perfect way to travel as a solo traveler, because then you could hop into these communities all around the world. And so I discovered that in Europe, especially, there are lots of these co-living spaces specifically for nomads. And so I decided to take that hospitality, entertainment background that I had and shift to do consulting for co-living spaces. And that's how I got started.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I had a little bit of experience trying to be a digital nomad, utterly failing because I couldn't work. I went to Thailand for a month and a half, and it was literally, I was like, I'm a freelancer. I can work from anywhere. I'm buying a one-way ticket to Thailand. And I found like some co-working spaces in Chiang Mai, and it was like, I'm just going to I'll travel some and I work some. So I ended up being there for like a month and a half. I worked maybe 2 days.
Oh, goodness.
And all of my money ran out, and I had to come back because there's too much exciting things to see. But I will say, while I was in Chiang Mai, I stayed at this guest house for a couple weeks. And it was a wonderful experience. There was this shared space where everybody sat together from all over the world. And it was the only place that you could get Wi-Fi. There wasn't Wi-Fi in the rooms. So everybody was forced into sitting in this common space. And people were playing music, eating, talking. People were introducing themselves to each other. And there was this amazing feeling of community. And I remember feeling, wow, this is what life should be like. Like when I'm home, I go to work every day. I go back home. I'm alone. Maybe at work, I meet some people. I work at a co-working space, so it has a little bit of a vibe, but still everybody's focused on getting their work done. Just like being surrounded. It's like my living space, and there's other people there, and there's, the bug was planted. And then just recently I went to a Burning Man event, which
also felt like that. And oh my God, it was only 3 days, but I had so many meaningful conversations. I spent so much time with new people, and it felt like there's clearly something missing from
Mm.
the normal so-called way of life, which is a tribe of people that are part of our lives in a more significant way. So I want to throw this back to you and ask kind of, how do you define co-living for people? I think most people are still not fully familiar. What is it and why should we care?
Yeah, absolutely. The term co-living, it's such a misunderstood term because it can mean a whole lot of different things to a whole lot of different people. So it's hard to give one definition. There are many different types of co-living. The type that I keep referring to is the digital nomad type spaces. And these are the spaces that are meant for remote workers around the world, where people can hop in, stay for a week. They might stay for a month. Typically, you have your own private space, but then you have shared space together as well. Usually there are community events and a community manager. There are opportunities to collaborate and connect, like you mentioned, on a deeper level. So the intention behind some of these spaces is to not create a networking atmosphere or an atmosphere of, a bunch of tourists who come in for a day and have a good time and then they leave, like in many hostels and those sort of shared living environments. But it's meant to create more long-term lasting relationships, and they're more intentional that way. But there's also different types of co-living. There's the long-term residential spaces, especially in the US, it'll be maybe a high-rise building of 100, 200 people, but there's this intention of forming community amongst a group of people who are living there full time. So having events and those sort of things happen as well. And then there's just the traditional shared living environments. There are co-living spaces that are meant for very specific niches. There are some that are meant for families, some that are meant for single moms, or some that are meant for seniors, older people. So there's a different type of co-living for every single niche out there. And so people get confused on what co-living can mean because it means a lot of everything. But in general, it's a shared living community in which people generally have private space and then shared areas as well. And there's just a community vibe. There's more of a connectedness to the experience.
Yeah. So I know there's a great range of different options here, both in terms of culture and vibe and in rules and spaces. There's like the urban kibbutz, which is actually also a big thing in Israel.
Yep.
There's the urban monastery, which is more kind of mindful. There's digital nomad spaces, but there's also co-living spaces that are fully just businesses, kind of like a WeWork. There's a We Live, right?
Yeah.
And so I wonder if you can give me some very starkly different examples so that we can get a sense of what's the possibility space out there.
Absolutely. So, an example of, say, a co-living space in London, like I've toured a few of the larger spaces there. It will be a high-rise building, 10 stories, 100 or more units. So you might come there and you want to live in London full-time. So usually these spaces are furnished. Maybe you moved from the US over and you want to live in this space for 6 months, a year, usually is at least the minimum on those. So some of them have really massive amenities. They might have a spa, a pool, a gym, all these sorts of things. So it's all the perks of living it's housing as a service, as a lot of places will call these larger spaces. And usually there's a community aspect to it. So there's a community manager. There will be events that are held, group events. Usually they're a little more curated events. So they'll have a calendar of events and you might participate in, say, movie night is this night, or, there's a co-working day here, or maybe dinner, group dinner that you all create in the common kitchen, whatever that is. That might be an example of a long-term residential co-living space. In terms of some of these more short-term co-living experiences, say you want to go and you want to work remotely in Spain for 2 weeks or a month. So you might go to one of these co-living spaces there and you might arrive to a smaller apartment building. Usually there are about 10 to 20 people in a house. So you will have your own private room and you share spaces and you will go and work there. So it's kind of a movable co-living experience, and that you might hop into this co-living space, you hop into another one the next month, or you go home for a little bit, you come back. Some people will go to the same co-living space each season, like they might go to Morocco for Christmas at this one co-living space. They might go to one in South America for the winter, and it just kind of rotates around. Or some people will just go and have one experience for a month and then that's all. But in general, they're forming these connections at each of these spaces that are a little bit different than staying at a hotel or an Airbnb where you're missing that experience. And for me, staying in these co-living spaces allows me to live more like a local, especially for the nomad spaces. There's a local host who knows the
Mm.
area, they know all the cool things to do, and you can just hop into life on day one, which is one of the
Mm.
biggest perks for me about co-living is that you can skip all those things when you first arrive to a new city and you're figuring out, okay, how's the Wi-Fi? Where should I work? Where do I eat? Where do I get cash? And all that's done for you because you have these very knowledgeable local hosts who can do that part for you.
What about the values and the cultures of these spaces? I'm sure there's ones that are just purely businesses, but I'm also sure I'm thinking about the 10 principles of Burning Man, where there's communities shaped by a certain set of principles or affinities. So give me some stark different examples of that.
Yeah, so I say, especially in the US, there's a misunderstanding about what co living can be because a lot of the major players are using the word co living to describe just shared living as a way to pack in more people into a smaller amount of space, which is a shame because there's more to co living than just sharing space. It's about all the perks that come along with shared living. I always say that co-living, it's not about having a smaller life or thinking you're like, oh, I have to have roommates now because I need to save money. It's about what the collective community experience can give you. And often people are willing to pay more because of the community aspect, not less because they have roommates. It's a different kind of mentality that you're seeing. And in a lot of spaces, they kind of market it as a way to save money in larger cities. Like in LA or New York, they might have a co-living house in which, is a way for you to afford to live in these places. But a lot of the places that I go to, it's actually more expensive than a traditional Airbnb that you might choose because of the community experience. So that's kind of a different way to see things, either living with people because you have to, or living with people because you want to have that experience.
I'm wondering, why is this a rational thing to do? Because I'm sure, so there's, I don't know if you watched the WeWork series on Apple TV
Yeah, I
about
did.
kind of the rise of, which I thought it was a great show. But there's this moment where, in his beginning, he wanted to build a co-living community before he pivoted to a co-working space. And there's a scene where they mock this idea and everybody makes fun of it. So it's like dorms. It's like dorms, but worse because they have to pay a lot of money. And
Yep.
I actually think that he understands something that they don't in that moment. What is it? What does he know? What do you know that the people who see this as like from a purely materialistic perspective, oh, this is like a smaller place, but it costs the same, or, what are they missing?
I think those type of people are missing the value of community. I think about times when I have moved to a new city, even in the US. I lived in Nashville for a long time and I moved to Austin. And it took me so long, years, to find solid friendships there. Because if you don't meet friends when you're at work or other sort of activities as an adult, it's really difficult to make friends. And there's just so much value in living and being part of a community because you have that built-in community on day one. And again, you can just hop right in and feel part of something that would have taken you years and years to do on your own. I mean, you think about, if you meet somebody at a yoga studio and you're like, oh, we should go get coffee someday. Okay. Then a week goes by and you do that. And then maybe a month later you do something else. How long does it take you to really get to know that person forever and ever? And I say that co-living just speeds up that whole process. And it gives you these group of people who usually most co-living spaces have a general theme or tends to draw in the same kind of person. Like for the nomad spaces, it draws in people who are typically entrepreneurs. They're into travel, they're into health and wellness, trying new experiences. So it pulls you into this group of people that have common interests already. So you just click when you arrive at these spaces. And so if you don't see the value in that and the community piece and being able to have these connected experiences, then co-living isn't for you. It's definitely not for everybody. I always say that. Not everyone gets the co-living thing, but the people who do are willing to go around the world. I've seen it, travel to places specifically for these communities. And it's so unique to see that people will go around the world just to be part of something that someone created as a co-living, co-working space. It's also not just, it is mostly about the community, but it's also about what you get by sharing resources, the extra things that you get access to. Maybe you're sharing bicycles or you're sharing rides to the airport, or, you have a gym in the space in which you wouldn't be able to afford on your own. All these extra perks and amenities. You have housekeeping, usually weekly housekeeping. So it's just an
Mm.
easier way of life all around. So it's,
Yeah.
not just community living, but it's ease of living.
You're listening to Remake, a podcast about design, systems, and society. If you're listening on a podcast app, you already know how to follow podcasts. So please follow this one. If you're listening in a browser, just go to remakepod.org to find links to all the major podcast players where you can follow our show.
And so your brand is the Coliving Consultant. Help me understand what falls under that title. What do you actually do for people? What does it look like?
So my focus is on the customer experience within co-living spaces. So it's a niche within a niche already. But I kind of realized when I started going to see some of these co-living communities that a lot of the larger ones that I had mentioned, they were really great with hospitality, but they missed the community piece of what co-living is meant to be. And a lot of the smaller ones were really great with strong communities, but they missed a lot of the hospitality best practices that happen when you arrive at a space, the communication points, the pieces you should learn, the parts of the information that you should pass on to the user to make a really great user experience. We're kind of missing or is inconsistent, at least because it's people running their own smaller spaces. And so I took that knowledge and created a co-living consultancy specifically around creating a really great, solid experiences from start to finish. So we will do user journey mapping. We'll look at each of the touch points of the ideal customer experience within a co-living space, and then look for ways to increase consistencies and make it an all-around better experience.
So I know this kind of under the rubric of service design with customer journeys, and the service is just really interesting and varied and complex, from the digital aspect, because you're probably booking it before you get there, to the space itself, the onboarding and offboarding, everything like that. It's a fascinating niche. So I'm especially interested in the area of culture and community. And I'll give you a little bit of background. So I actually worked at the first WeWork ever.
Oh, wow.
In New York and I was also there, I think, the second month that it opened. Our startup moved there. And so there was no community whatsoever. And I saw them experimenting and trying different things to make it work. And for months, it didn't quite work. And I did think that WeWork kind of figured it out at a much higher level later. But these early events, they felt like networky or just like awkward, like really awkward, where we're like standing and some person was presenting and nobody knew why they were there.
Yeah.
But clearly everybody wanted to know the people in the office around them, right? So this topic of community and culture, they're elusive, they're tricky. I would love to hear, what is culture, what is community, and how do you make it work?
Yeah, so I see this a lot, especially in the larger spaces. They get confused on what community can mean because they think it means planning events, having an event calendar where this is what we do, and then everyone shows up and they watch and then they leave. And that's the opposite of what a community is. A community is a collective experience. So the spaces that are doing it really well are those that are facilitating community-led events. So you get your community involved in planning the community itself. And that's the huge difference, the shift between being an event planner and someone who facilitates community. Those are two very different things. And so when you can facilitate these community-led events and you're getting your community not only invested in the experience, it makes for more unique experiences because you never know what you're going to get as far as what people are going to lead and be part of. But also it gets your community more invested in the space itself and creating the experience. And that means they stay longer, and that means they love it more, and they tell more of their friends about it. So it's a big piece. You know, it sounds counterintuitive that you should, well, if you want to make people happy, you should do everything for them. But with co-living, it's the opposite. You want to get them involved in that piece because it makes for a better experience for everyone.
It's really awesome. I'm sad to have to keep bringing up Burning Man, but this is a recent thing for me.
I've never been. You should tell me more.
Yeah, they're all over the world. So it's really just be prepared to be offered a lot of different types of drugs. And if it's not your thing, like it's actually not my thing. You have to say no. So I was at this event with the founders of this annual event, which is in Israel. It's kind of a local event for Hanukkah that they do every year, and it's about 1,000 people. And now there's an offshoot, so it's about 2 events of 1,000 people each. And the founder of this event basically said, my role today, it's evolved over the years, but today, all I do is say the date. All I do is it's going to be these 3 days and everything just happens of its own. Like there's so many volunteers and so much participation and passion that it's just amazing and I don't have to do much, which is a completely opposite type of leadership than you might see in many businesses or
Yeah, so I always give the example of this space in Spain that I love. It's called Sun & Co. And they do a really great job of facilitating their community. So when you get to the space, they'll ask you, what do you want to teach and what do you want to learn? And so every week they have a family meeting and everyone gets together and they write a big list on the wall of what you want to teach and what you want to learn. And then they plan those events based off of those 2 things. And every single event that they have is led by someone in the community. So the manager does not participate in these things. They can if they want to, but it's up to you to create that experience. So if you sign up for, I'm going to teach a photography class this week, you're in charge of picking the time and writing it in the calendar and showing up, facilitating that, which is really great because, again, you come up with these super unique experiences. And every time you go there, you know it's going to be a different experience because there are different people showing you different things. And we did so many things in that week, 2 weeks I was there. And it's still amazing how you can pack in that many learning experiences. And I think we had conversations around spirituality. We had a night on that. We had a mastermind session for my business at that time. I was still working through some things and we did that. We did hiking and we did tapas nights, all these sorts of things. But it's just a good collaboration of a good way to create that community-led experience without having to create events. So that is a solid experience, I would say, in facilitating your community.
That's amazing. So you wrote an article about co-living as a potential solution for seniors. So I'd love to get your take to why do you think is this a kind of a perfect fit for seniors?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just a no-brainer as far as what community can do throughout your life, but especially for seniors. My grandma was in a community living space. I would call it a co-living space in a smaller historic town near where I grew up. And it was such a cool thing. I always just thought that's the kind of place I would want to grow up. It didn't feel like a assisted living. It was just a bunch of women living together and having really cool experiences and having things going on all the time and having shared meals. And it just felt like such a positive thing. And I think especially in different parts of the world, we have this group of people aging, and what do they do at near the end of their life, or even not even the end of their life, but after you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s, you still want that community piece, no matter how old you are. And I think when you can offer something like co-living, it's a different experience than assisted living. And it's something to look forward to and not something that you're dreading because I've seen some really great experiences. It's all about reframing the experience and not making people think, oh, I have to downsize, I have to live with roommates. It's not that at all. It's a much better experience. It's much more supported experience. I think it just makes total sense to have more of these senior-based co-living spaces and multi-generational spaces too. We're seeing that too, as far as people of all ages and families. It takes a village to raise a family, right? And so having that more of a back to the way things used to be, where we can all contribute and make life easier on everybody all around by being part of a community.
Yeah, I remember seeing this place. I don't remember where it was, but it was like a senior community and a kindergarten at the same time.
Yeah.
And so the senior got the fun of interacting with the kids. The parents knew that the kids were safe because they had very experienced people looking after them in addition to the staff.
Yep.
And it's just such a lovely thing that would have been completely natural in any kind of tribal or village environment, right? Where the way that we evolved, there are multiple generations together in the same space and it's relational.
Yeah, I think there's so much that different ages can offer each other that it just makes sense to do these sorts of things. In the article, I mentioned a project that I had read about in the US. There was a university and they had a senior living component to their university. And I thought it was such a cool concept because not only they lived in their own building near campus, but they were also able to volunteer, as docents, or some of them did guest lectures, and they had mentorship programs. So like the college students could learn from these people, these people living on campus, and they were more involved in the sports teams, and there were always ways for them to volunteer and give back to the community, but also added such value to the people who were there, besides all of the learning opportunities.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Actually, why would senior communities ever just not be universities? Like, why don't we make every single university have a senior community inside of it? It's like dorms. It's similar to dorms. So you just build another dorm that's suitable. You give them access to the lessons. They can volunteer at all of these different places. I mean, wow. I actually think my parents would have liked that. They're looking at
who
wouldn't?
Right, that's what I talk about. When you talk about co-living, there's just so many options for all different demographics, all ages, all people who are interested in specific things. There's so many ways that you can make this work within so many different people's lives to make them better. And I think that's the whole point of co-living and community, what it can offer as an option, especially people who are so used to doing everything on their own. I give this example of I had traveled by myself for several years, and you just forget how difficult it is to do everything on your own all the time. I was at a space in Morocco, and somebody just offered to watch my bag at one point so I could go run and get a cab. And I'm like, this feels so nice to have somebody that I trust to sit there and watch my bag while I go across the street instead of lugging it all down the hill myself. And just little things like that. Everything's easier when you have a community of people who you can count on.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So how did we get to, I don't expect you to have an answer, but maybe you do. How do we get to this place of living this isolated life, so much alienation where you have to go work in your cubicle, and then you go to your separate home if you live alone, or even if it's just you and your wife and your kids, but so isolated from the rest of society, where we have these amazing people around us. Why did we get it into our heads that we need this separation?
I say this a lot as far as the differences between the American view of co-living and European views, because in Europe, co-living is a lot more normal, and you say the word co-living and most people know what you're talking about. When you say it in the US, they have no idea because most people don't understand it at all. And I think especially growing up in the US, and Americans have this view of, I want space and I want to have my own house. And there's a lot of pride in having a lot of space. And there's just this attitude of being able to take care of myself and I can do this. And that's fine. But there are just so many different options. It's just a mindset shift about you don't have to do all of that on your own. And it's actually added value when you don't have to, and you can be part of these communities. And so I don't know where it started in particular, but I know that there's different mentalities in different parts of the world who some are more open to communal living and some are not as open, or I think it will take a lot longer to catch up.
Yeah. I've read some writing from Erich Fromm where he's a German psychologist, philosopher. I think he blames Martin Luther for creating the sense of isolation. It's one-on-one, me and God, and everyone else is, probably going to hell. And so it creates walls between people. Whereas, not to point fingers, but I think that it's definitely a set of beliefs about other people, and how much you can trust them, and how much you can, how much they're a value in your life. In my culture, grew up in Israel, people are the top value, like friends, a circle of friends. The meaning that you get out of that is the most important thing. It's far more important than a job or making a lot of money or anything like that. And so I think it would be more natural. It is more natural in the kind of Israeli mindset.
Yeah. And I say in the US that, I grew up in a very small town, so there's a very strong community feel in my town, which is part of why I'm drawn to so much community now, is that there's definitely a vibe of people will take care of you. If something happens, somebody's going to jump in and they'll bring casseroles to your door the next day. It's that kind of small town vibe. But there's still very much a belief that you have to do things a certain way, that you go to college and that's cool when you have roommates then, but then get a job, you get married, you buy a house and you have babies. Like those, that's the path of how things go. And especially there's this a big pride in ownership as far as owning your home and, having that sense of ownership there. But so there are still communities, but I can't imagine anyone in my hometown being excited about sharing a co-living space with other
Yeah.
people in that community. But it's a different kind of experience. And part of it maybe is from the 60s with the communes and those sorts of things. There's still that kind of mentality in people's head. That's what co-living is. It's a commune or something weird or something off, that you're different if that's what you want to do. And so there's a little bit of, I think, untraining of the mindset of what shared living can look like.
I mean, and some people in intentional communities are a little weird, but we, we can celebrate that. Also, it's the people, and I think one of the things, we look at the trends in Burning Man or like these intentional communities that are popping up, they're all about radical self-expression and living a better life. I remember I walked into this co-living home in San Francisco a couple years back, and it was like just a big home. Like it was like adult roommates, basically. But they decided that they're a community and they're going to have a lecture every Friday and they're going to do. And you can look at it and say, oh, these people are weird. Or you can look at it and say, their lives are probably much fuller than mine. I'm watching TV alone at night, right? Or just dealing with my small family. And so I see I see a tension between this desire to travel and be very dynamic and move from space to space, and a desire to lay roots and belong and go deeper into one space. Mm-hmm. So how do you work with this desire? Is there a co-working or co-living a solution for both types of people? And, how does it work?
Yeah, I think eventually as nomads, people tend to start out and they travel really fast and they want to see as many places as possible. They're so excited. And then a year or so in, they realize, okay, I want to slow down a little bit. And they become slow mads, we call them. So they might move every 3 months or so is usually how long a visa is allowed in a particular place. So people tend to move every 3 months. So they might stay in one place for a season and move to the next. Some people will go back to the same places again for different seasons. Some people end up, buying a property or having a home base and then still using that base to travel to different parts of the world or renting it out on Airbnb when they're gone. So there's a lot of opportunities for people who want to have a home base in some of these communities around the world. Again, a lot of the nomad hotspots are specific cities where the quality of life is really high, the general expenses are low, there's a sense of community, the Wi-Fi is fast. And so in places like Buenos Aires, it's ideal. In Medellin, in Colombia, that's another big one in South America, lots of places in Asia. In Europe, there are lots of hubs as well, Bulgaria being one of them. Cape Town is huge. I was there last winter and it's a big nomad hub now. All these different places around the world where people might say, okay, maybe I'm going to spend the winter in Cape Town every year and I'm going to go to the same apartment and I know that I'm going to go to the same co-working space and a lot of the same people will be there. And so it acts as a sense, for me, community acts as a sense of home, regardless of where I am in the world. It acts as that grounding point for me to be able to travel like I do. Because I think if I were just traveling as a regular traveler and going to new places all the time, which I pretty much do, then I think I would get tired if I weren't part of a community where I felt connected and felt like I could hop in whenever I wanted. If you're just doing things by yourself and staying at Airbnbs in particular, it's a very isolating way of life and it gets old after a while. And so these communities offer a sense of home for so many people, especially the co-living spaces, because they tend to have the same people running, the same team running the space. So when you go back to that space in Spain that you're going to see the same people and they're going to know you and they're going to be excited to see you. And it's just that feeling of coming home wherever you are in the world. And that's such a unique thing to be able to be a wanderer and travel as you do, but have that sense of home in so many different places around the world. And I think that's how a lot of nomads tend to travel these days. And another thing I'm working on is a mentorship program for women who specifically want to travel more. I started out as a solo traveler and I've learned so much on my own traveling and how to see the world when at first it felt really impossible. It felt very difficult to figure out how to do some of the things that I do now. And I've realized through a variety of different ways that there are a lot of ways that you can see the world. And I just highly encourage people to do so. I had a lot of women when I'm posting on Instagram, all the pretty places that I am, who would reach out and say, how do I do that? You're so lucky. You're so lucky you get to do this. And I am very lucky. But again, it was still a conscious choice to work toward that life. So I started a group specifically for women who want to learn about how I did it, and also to give them some tips and some incentives, some goals to set throughout the year so that we can get together and talk about our travel experiences and set our intentions for the year. And that's been really fun to be able to show other women what's possible in terms of travel.
Wow, that's amazing. So I have one final question for you, and this is our standard closing question. In his TED Talk, the philosopher Alain de Botton talks about the difference between a lecture and a sermon. A lecture being kind of a dry, informational way of giving information, and you sort of make up your own mind. And a sermon, which he longs for the days of sermons, is an urgent plea to change someone's life. You're actually grabbing them and trying to shake them into seeing something that they're missing. So if you were given the opportunity to give a short sermon to the world, what would it be about?
My sermon, it would be about opening yourself up to the opportunities of living life a little bit differently and thinking about it as soon as possible. I think a lot of people, when you talk to nomads, they will ask you, what's the one thing that you would change? And they would say, I wish I would have done it sooner, because it's just such a life-changing experience to live a life of travel. Even if you decide it's not for you and you step away from it and maybe come back to it later, it makes such a huge difference in the way that you work, in the way that you see the world, and meeting people who, I always say nomads are some of the most interesting people in the world to me, because they have such a different mindset already of doing things a little bit differently and not feeling bad about it, or not feeling pressured to do things a certain way, because we're all just a little bit off in that way, that we like to do things differently, and we don't mind questioning that. And for many, many years, I worked a 9-to-5 job and did the normal things that you should do as an adult. And I just wish I would have done this sooner. And I think that everybody who's done this experience would say the same. So, give yourself the opportunity to, even if it's just for a month, to get away and do a solo trip. For one, solo travel is just so impactful for me. And I think everybody in the world needs to take a solo trip at least some point in their life. So yeah, get away, do a little bit of traveling, and just imagine the opportunities that exist out there, because there is a way to live this life, no matter your budget, no matter your lifestyle, no matter your job. There are different ways to think about the way that you structure and live your life. So think about your options.
Wonderful. Thank you, Leah. I really appreciate your time. This was wonderful.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Remake is produced by myself and Regina Rothstein. Research and editing by Louis Brady. And audio engineering by Greg Cocoveos. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider writing a 5-star review in Apple's podcast or wherever you're listening. It helps many more people discover the podcast and also just makes us feel good. Current support for the podcast comes from my own design company, Remake Labs. We're a global strategic design speed agency aimed at improving outcomes through repeated and rapid design interventions. Now, until next time, be well, everyone, and see you next week on Remake.